Hello and welcome. Yeah. This week is week 8, and we're headed to Arizona on my 50 state Zen quilt journey. Um, and just so happens that I'll be in Arizona while this is releasing. So, how exciting is that? Anyway, go ahead and offer yourself gratitude and appreciation for allowing yourself this creative time. And thank you so much for joining me on this adventure, whether it be for just 1 week or 50. Know that I appreciate you so very much. Here's a visual of all of the tools that you saw on the supplies that I will be using. You can feel free to use any color that works for you. Push all this off to the side and keep just my pencil, my ruler, and my tile. Okay, so we're going to start with our 3/16 inch border that we start with on each one of our quilt blocks. Just gives us the framework to create inside of, and also gives us an edging so that when we get to the point of putting all of these quilt blocks together, we can do so without interrupting the details and tangles inside of our quilt, yeah, or our blocks. So just taking the time to add this 3/16 inch border all the way around. Yeah. And now that we have that border, we're going to measure 5/8 from both the left and right side of that frame. So little hash mark 5/8 from the left and 5/8 from the right. And I'm going to go ahead and just pull my ruler down and add another pair of hash marks just so that I have a little bit of a offset so I get a straight line when I connect these. All right. So I'm going to connect these side to side, border to border. So I'm not going to go through the border. I'm just going to connect this side to side. And now that I have these 2 rows in my tile, I'm going to go ahead and within that row, add another pair of 5/8 hash marks at both the top and again at the bottom. And I'm going to connect those. So turning my tile so that I'm laying horizontally, I'm going to connect those hash marks horizontally. So when we're done, I'm going to have 4 overlapping channels. Yeah. So now I'm going to take this big rectangular space and I'm going to add another hash mark at 5/8. So every 5/8, I'm going to lay another hash mark in that big rectangular space. So I'll get 2 hash marks within that rectangular space. So I'm going to do that inside of each rectangle. So we have these hash marks at 5/8 to divide up this rectangle. And now we're going to lay our ruler side to side horizontally and connect only from our border line to our original 5/8 line. So we're not going to go all the way through. We're going to just go from our border to that first 5/8 line. And then we're going to go to the other side and do exactly the same thing. So we're not going through our center at all. Okay? We're going to do that for each pair of hash marks. Stopping when we get to that inside line, not going through the center. And then we're going to turn our tile and do exactly the same thing, being mindful that we do not go through the center. So we're going to end up with a border of 5/8 blocks all the way around the outer edge of an inner central open block. Okay? So that's where we are. All right. So now we're going to take our ruler across the first blocks. So block to the top, block to the right from our corner. And we're going to go corner to corner or diagonally to connect those blocks. So block to the top, block to the right. That top line and that furthest right line, we're going to connect diagonally, line to line across the top. And we're going to do that for each corner. So top block, right block, grabbing those outer line ends to that block and connecting diagonally side to side. All right. So now we have our corners defined with these triangles. Now this center block that we have, we're going to divide that in half. So we want to measure 5/16 and add a little hash mark. So 5/16 in each one of these center blocks is going to give us the center of that block. And we're going to need that for our next step. So adding that little hash at 5/16. And now that we have that 5/16 measured to divide those blocks in half, we're going to aura this diagonal line using those hash marks. So we're going to add a diagonal side to side using the hash marks that we just created, auraing that first diagonal. And we're going to do that all the way around. So we're auraing that diagonal using those hash lines as our center point of that center block. Okay. So now that center diamond has been formed with these channels of, in essence, material, and we're going to take our inner line and measure that. So we're going to have two lines are longer than the other two lines. So you're going to want to find your longer lines. So one of our sides is 21 lines on our ruler, and another side is 22 lines on our ruler, okay? So for the 22 inch, or not 22, but for the 22 lined side, we're going to lay a hash mark at 11. So 11/16, 11/16 on our 22 line side. So 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. Okay. So half of 22 would be our 11/16 line. So since this is 22, this one is going to be 22 as well. So we're going to lay a line, our hash mark at our 11/16. Okay. All right. So we've found the center of our 22 line length line, top and bottom. So that leaves these shorter sides at 21. So that means we need to add a line at the space between our 10 and 11 mark. So just to confirm, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. Right. So this line is 21 lines long, or 1 and 5/16. For those of you not on this journey with me and this is your first time, I am math challenged and ruler even more challenged. So I operate off of numbers of lines, not by measurements. So I apologize for that, but thanks for your grace. So 21 lines gives us the space between 10 and 11 where we want to lay our little hash mark. So the space between our lines 10 and 11/16 is going to be our hash mark. So again, this line is the same length. So we're looking for 10 and a half. All right. So now that we've found the center of each of these inner lines, we're going to lay our ruler so that the hash mark is on 1/8. Okay, so that hash mark is on 1/8 of my ruler. I'm going to lay a hash mark at the first line, so 1/8 before and 1/8 after, giving me a 1/4 inch channel by the time I'm done. Okay, so I'm going to put that hash mark on 1/8. I'm going to measure 1/8 to the left, 1/8 to 1/8 to the right, giving me a 1/4 of an inch in width. I'm going to do that to all the sides. 1/8 to the left, 1/8 to the right. Okay. Now that we have this 1/4 inch defined, we're going to lay our ruler side to side and connect the left and right, ignoring that center. Only the left and right hash marks are going to be connected. So we have that channel right down the center of that block. And now I'm going to connect side to side, the exact same thing, only this time I'm going to use my go behind. So the left and the right hash, ignoring that center mark, using the go behind, and only drawing what you see. All right. So we're just about done. We still need to add some diagonal lines into our outer boxes to create a bear paw quilt variation. So that's the name of the quilt that we're going to be using for this, and it's the bear paw, but it's a variation of. All right, so the first block to the left, actually I'm going to turn so that my single channel is facing the top left corner. All right, so my top left corner is going to be free. It's going to be open. The second block, I'm going to add a diagonal from corner to corner, from top left to bottom right. In the next two boxes, I'm going to change direction for that diagonal, and I'm going to go bottom left to top right. Bottom left to top right. And I'm going to have an open box. So that takes me into the second row. I'm going to have a diagonal from the top left to the bottom right. And on the right side, the bottom left to the top right. In the next box, bottom left to the top right. And the next box on the other side, bottom left to top right. Then down below that, again, we're going to do bottom left to top right. And this time on the other side, we're going to do top left to bottom right. Keeping our corner boxes whole, we're not dividing those. In the first box, we're going to bottom left, top right. Again, bottom left to top right. And then in that final box, we're going to go top left to bottom right. All right. Ah, take a breath, drop those shoulders. Yeah, we are all strung up for our Arizona quilt. Yeah. All right. So Arizona is going to take a little bit of a twist with our color palette, and I was happy to have that come to light. So I'm kneading my eraser right now as I speak to you, because what I'm going to do is just tone these string lines back a bit. We don't want to erase them, but we, of course, will be using them. We've just taken the time to create them. But I'm just going to tone them back so that they don't overpower the color palette, because we're going pretty light and very pastel-y, actually, for Arizona, which took me a little off guard. I thought we would be introducing a bit more of the oranges, the rusts, and the turquoises. But this quilt actually was very explicit in the color palette when I used the book. So I'm going to roll with it and allow that color palette to be expressed. Yeah. So I'm going to start with my blending, and the center is going to be a blend of the greens. So I have that kind of olivey green and maybe a bit more of the lime green happening as a marriage together for that center. So this bear claw variation quilt is a variation to the, I hope I say this correctly, the saguaro cactus blossom, which is the Arizona state flower. So the quilt pattern is saying that these internal lines are the stems of the cactus blossom, the triangles on the outside. Okay, so that's what we're going to honor. And those interior channels are going to be our palette of greens. So I'm just laying both of them down together off to the side. So here's my palette, those greens off to the side, and I'm going to take my blender and make sure my blender is clean from the last state I worked on. And I'm going to grab some light green and dark green together, kind of meld it together right onto my blender. And those center channels, I'm going to allow to come together in some form of blended expression of these two colors. You can blend them on your tile directly. You can blend them off on the palette. You cannot blend them at all and kind of do a light channel and a dark channel. However you see these greens coming together for you into these spaces, that's where we are right now. So we're back to the adding our color to our tiles first and then tangling on top of those colors with our grays. We got a little back to the tangle and color second, which is kind of, I think, almost the typical way of adding color into our pieces, unless it's a bit more of an abstract vision where we're kind of inking on top of those abstract color blotches. In either case, we're offering our palette. And again, noticing that I'm not trying to smooth these colors out. I'm loving how the dark and light greens are blending together. And I'm also loving how, as I lay it just by default, I'm getting darker, more concentrated color versus the kind of more washed out, more transparent spaces. And that all comes together in the highlighting and shading of our tangling when we get to that piece. Again, can always add more. Much easier to add more than try to take away, right? So starting out with our first layer, building upon that. Okay, I'm going to call that green center done for the moment. And I'm going to go to my pinks. Oh, what a refreshing addition to our color palette. So I have a really kind of bright pink, that 703, and then I have more of a rosier, dusty pink. And those are the colors that I'm going to lay down on my palette and blend together. Again, making sure my blender is super clean. And we're not going to be adding pink to all of our triangular spaces. So just follow along and be mindful as to where we're placing our pink into which triangles. So I'm going to start right here in that top left corner, and the triangles that are facing or landing on my center square. That's where I'm going to start with that bright pink palette right up into the pinch. And then I'm going to go grab that kind of dusty pink and come right on over top, pulling that down and adding a bit of a texture through my color, right? Right over top, spreading that bright pink down and adding that dusty pink. So I have my depth up into the pinch by default of how I laid that bright pink down, and then toned it down a bit by going right over top of it with my dusty pink. So each triangle that lays on the center is what's going to get pink. Each triangle that has its full body or one whole side resting on that inner square is what is going to be that cactus flower or blossom. So I mentioned that this is the first time that colors were really kind of announced in this process. Up until this point, I kind of, whatever kind of spoke to me, and again, trying to keep a similar palette, or at least a marriage of one color into each week so that we have some kind of continuity over the overall picture of this quilt as it comes together. But in the Workbasket book this week, when I read into, the pieces of this quilt and how it all comes together, it very specifically said either a color palette of green and pink or of green and yellow. So if given the opportunity to pick pink, I'm always going to pick pink. That is my favorite color ever. So for the first time, we're introducing pink into our color palette. But now that we have it here, we can't have this quilt kind of stand alone in that expression. So I'm sure that there will be another opportunity to offer pink as we go through this process. Since we have a whole lot of yellow, because I kind of chose yellow as my neutral tone from the beginning. So yellow has a lot of voice into our states so far. So I thought it was just fun. And again, I was really shocked that we weren't going into the rusts and the turquoise of what, Arizona typically has as a color palette when we think Arizona. So a fun little twist honoring the state flower in this expression. change that perspective. Any petals that you want to add more color to. Now's the opportunity to allow those little blossoms to speak to you. So, in all of the white space that we have left, I'm going to be adding that light blue, that super light blue that has kind of taken us through many of our journeys so far. But this time, I'm going to offer it with a blender. So I'm going to go ahead, lay my palette down, make sure that my blender is clean from that pink. And I'm going to go in and lay that blue down to every white space that still exists. Again, not caring about those dark and light spaces and trying to smooth them out and embrace them. They will be beautiful on the underside of our tangles as we begin expressing our tangles into these spaces. A beautiful pastel-y vision happening here in Arizona. We can offer that same reminder to drop our shoulders and check in on that heartbeat while we're in the repetition of coloring as well. Yeah, all part of the process as we design our fabric of our quilt, right? Such a beautiful way of quilting, allowing our creative expression to create material that represents the state that we're in. I'm having so much fun exploring different tangles that kind of fit into the concept or theme of the state that we're in. And then on the outside, just because I can, I'm going to stick with that pink and I'm going to bring that pink out further. So I'm going to start with my lime green into the corners. And I'm going to go directly to my tile for this part, right? And then that rose colored pink is what I'm going to use on my edge, just so it's a bit more toned down and not so overpowering, but always an option. I personally feel like you can never have too much pink, so and then as always, we're going to pick that tile up and just grab those deckled edges. Take our marker right along the side so that we don't see any white when we put our quilt together. And yet we have beautiful material edges. So on to tangling. We're going to be working our tangling in both our light gray and dark gray this week, because I feel like my light gray got a little lost in the darkness of our green here. So I opted to redo and add some dark gray into that space, and that's where we're going to start. So in each one of these channels, I'm going to honor the fact that this is the stem to our saguaro cactus blossom, which is the state flower. So I am going to add magictus. I don't know if that's how you say it, but Magictu', magictus, maybe. I don't know. Magictus. Cactus Magictus. Anyway, that's where I'm headed. So it is supposed to be inspired by a Christmas cactus, but we're going to roll with it and use it as our saguaro cactus. All right. So I'm going to start right here in the center, and I'm going to arch a line and aura that arch. And then once I have that line created, I'm going to create a C stroke that comes back briefly upon itself to create these leaf-like shapes. And I'm going to do the same on each side. So almost cutting in and then forming that C stroke back out. And I'm going to meander these C strokes or arches up the length of this channel, adding another section of that magictus up that channel. So I'm building upon each one of those segments so that I can then add another one using my go behind where the material has gotten cut off. So I'm going to do exactly the same thing. And I'm just going to change directions of my beginning arches in each one of those channels to create that material, honoring the stems of our cactus. No right or wrong. These sections can be as long or as short as you see them. But being inspired by the Christmas cactus, if you've ever seen the Christmas cactus, it has these individual pods of leaves that all connect through one strand, but there's a breakage to it. There's not a breakage, but a disconnect. It's not one smooth, flowy, viney expression. Yeah. So that's where this break comes into play for this tangle. And again, turning my tile, offering that arch and aura, continuing to add our little jaggedy leaf structures, using our go behind when we run out of room. In this center, it's most likely two different pieces of material. So it's not like you need to use your go behind and connect to the other side. It can be a completely separate vision. What I'm finding most intriguing about the research that I'm doing for these quilts is that although our elements aren't supposed to necessarily look like anything, a lot of our tangles are inspired by things which are giving us the names of the things that I'm looking for, or helping to kind of define that breakout. So it's just been kind of fun. All right. So now I'm going to go to these blue spaces, some triangular, some square, and I'm going to add the tangle Navajo. So one of the biggest tourist attractions are the Navajo Tribal Park, at Monument Valley. So when I saw pictures of it, I was just in awe of the beauty. So Navajo is our tangle around the outside for our Monument Valley Navajo Tribal Park. So Navajo begins with a diagonal line from corner to corner. And from that diagonal line, I'm going to aura thinly 2 times. And once I aura 2 times, I'm going to turn my tile and aura 2 times on the other side of that original diagonal line. Now there's a whole lot of variations for Navajo, but I am going to keep it to its original. And its original, again, now that we have those 5 lines, I'm going to turn my tile and draw a diagonal line from corner to corner, right through those lines. And I'm going to do exactly the same thing. So I'm going to aura 2 times below that original line, very thin. And then I'm going to turn my tile and aura 2 times thinly on the other side. So that's Navajo. So when I get to a triangle, I'm only going to be able to redefine that string line, and that's my diagonal from corner to corner. And I'm only going to do 2 auras on one side thinly. Then I'm going to turn my tile. Here's my diagonal from corner to corner. And then I'm going to aura on either side of that original line thinly 2 times. So that's how our triangles are going to look. So diagonal, thinly aura 2 times. Diagonal from the corner, auraing 2 times on one side, turning your tile and auraing on the other side 2 times. When you get to this space where your triangles are connecting, you can choose to sew your material together so that these pieces align, or you can have them offset so that they don't align. Totally your call. So I'm going to choose to try to keep them together. So that the material was cut deliberately to make that happen. Drop those shoulders. Check in on that breath and enjoy the repetition of Navajo. And there we have our Navajo background, and I chose to let my center kind of stand alone in just being blue. I thought that it might get a little too busy in there with Navajo, but by all means, if that speaks to you, you could go ahead and fill your Navajo into that center space as well. But inside of our cactus blossoms, our triangles, our pink little triangular spaces, I'm going to go to the tourist attraction, the wave. And if you've not seen, please Google the wave and just see how that sandstone rock forms into these ripples and layers and just looks like magic. So inside of our blossoms, we're going to kind of mimic the wave with our sand swirl. So instead of being a sandstone rock formation, we're going to get that movement with our auras in that sand swirl. All right. So sand swirl, I'm going to start by adding my little fescue heads out of each corner. And these little fescue heads could be as long or as short as you see them. They could be as intertwined or as far apart as you see them. But just know that inevitably, no matter how far apart you add them, we are going to make them all connect in the end. So once we get our fescue, and you could have as many fescue into this space as you see, right? I'm just going to grab one out of each corner. I'm then going to take each fescue that I've added and deliberately and intentionally, very mindfully, add an aura around each one of those fescue heads. Right around the back, swirling and stopping. Once I get all of them aura at one time, I'm going to repeat that process until I can't aura anymore. One at a time, building those auras, allowing them to interconnect by default of how they're laid, one aura at a time, filling that space until you can't go anymore. And then I'm just going to fill the rest of the space as if. So there's our sand swirl. So I'm going to lay fescues out of each corner, and I'm not going to try to make them match. I'm not going to try to allow each triangle to have the same expression. I'm just going to lay a fescue out of each corner and replicate that process one aura at a time, honoring the wave. And again, if you've not seen what it is I'm talking about, please Google the wave in Arizona. It's right up at the border of Utah and Arizona. And it just looks like pure magic. Deliberate and intentional with each stroke as it rounds around those individual fescues that we began with, filling in that space. one aura at a time. You're gripping that pen and your hand is starting to cramp up. Go ahead and take that pause, stretch those fingers. Maybe raise your arms up over your head. There's no race, there's no rush. Take your time, listen to your body. Change your perspective and see how our waves are coming together and forming into this beautiful cactus blossom, right? Honoring so many pieces of Arizona. Man, change that perspective. Ooh, ah. Look at how that shading of our blending comes together underneath our ink. So beautiful. Yeah. So we're headed back to that dark gray again for our stitching. So every single one of these triangles, every single one of these little pieces of material on the inside all get stitched together. So just digging in those short staccato pen strokes, creating those very deliberate, intentional thread marks as we sew up all of these individual pieces that we've cut. Creating that Arizona block. This right here is the magic of our tile. It's what brings the whole piece together. And it's a great addition to that repetition and mindfulness, yeah? One stitch at a time. Your time allowing that pen to start and stop cleanly so that you're not getting those straggly tails off the back of your pen. As you hurry to get the process done. Enjoy the process. Don't rush the process. Imagine as you're pen stitching these pieces together, a needle with thread going up and down, a thimble possibly on your finger below as you push that needle back out through the layers. Embrace the process. So we're all stitched up. Change that perspective. Yeah. How lovely. So all we have to do to complete this tile is a bit of shading. And again, this week is just the same in that we're not shading individual tangles, but rather pieces of our block. So I'm going to start with my blue, that 1088, and I'm going to go right against that stitching, as in every other week, right against that stitching, keeping that shading tight, circular motion, and adding a shade or a depth to the whole piece of fabric on that quilt, not just the tangles within. So by doing this circular tight stroke right against our stitching, we're allowing that stitching to kind of pucker and bring that center raised portion by default of the pucker to kind of raise and have a highlight. So we're showing the poof of that material, and we're showing the depth or shadow right along each of those stitch lines. And I mean, I'm not going crazy with the pressure of my pencil. My pencil pressure is pretty light. Again, just circular motion is just enough to give it a hint of a voice into that shading element. So if you question what you're doing, just go ahead and pull that tile out at arm's length, and you can definitely see where we've been and where we've not been with that subtle little hint of depth um, by or with our colored pencils into this mix. Yeah, so just changes the voice of our block completely, and yet we're not doing much by way of pressure or depth, and even using very similar colors to offer this depth. And yet, the impact when you look away is pretty powerful. And we can even see, um, that highlight that forms by default of the way we add that shading around our edges. No matter how you laid that marker and where the depth and variation of color fell, doesn't matter. Our center is still the key focal point, the highlight of us rounding around each one of those spaces. Circular motion gives us a bit more opportunity for depth and a gradual kind of roll off of that color, as opposed to a back and forth motion that doesn't allow you to really manipulate or shade off, taper off that shading. Yeah. All right, so I'm going to go to my magenta, that 930, and that's what I'm going to very lightly offer into each one of my lotus petals. Now, this is such a bright color, it could overtake really quickly. So I'm just ever so slightly offering just kind of a haze of color into that space. And again, well, then why bother? Are you really accomplishing anything? Well, halfway through, we'll take that pause and see where we've been versus where we've not been. And you can answer that question for yourself. Yeah. I love that halfway mark when you do a technique so that you can see the visual difference. So slight, but there. These completed, these not. Right? So the only space we have left to do is that center, that green, our vines or our stems, excuse me, of our cactus blooms. So I'm going to take that green, that 1098, and offer again right along that sewn line. And with that dark green, and now this dark green, see how changing your perspective matters? I didn't stitch this band, so I'm going to go in and quickly stitch that center band. So yeah, when you think you got it all done, changing that perspective, that's when you see what you haven't done. But as I was saying, this dark green on top of the mix or blend of greens on that center, if we just did the light gray in the center, well, I can show you. It's kind of nondescript, kind of gets lost in the mix of there. So here is our dark gray versus light gray center on that green. I really love the voice that that center offers. Yeah. All right. So there we have it. Arizona, oddly in pinks and greens, not rusts and turquoise. Anyway, much gratitude to all of you for sharing your creative space with me. I appreciate you. Until next time.